Okay.
Excellent. All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Appreciate you hanging in there. We're having some technical difficulties, but we're able to maneuver in a certain way here. I've got Juanita on my cell phone through the sound, so we'll doing some improv here. Gotta love it. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is another session of the Chamber Chat. My name is PJ Prunty. I'm the president and CEO of the Greater Danbury Chamber of Commerce, and we are very fortunate to be joined by Juanita James. Juanita is the president and CEO of the Fairfield County Community Foundation. Juanita, thank you very much. First off, how are you and your family doing? How was your Mother's Day weekend?
My Mother's Day weekend was fabulous because I had both my son here. My son is here, so he's working from home via Connecticut. So it was fun having him actually physically present for Mother's Day for a while. So that was good.
That's excellent. I'm glad to hear that. And happy belated Mother's Day to you and all the mothers out there as well.
Well, thank you so much.
Absolutely. So we'll dive right into it. Let's talk a little bit about the landscape in terms of COVID's impact on Connecticut. Where do you and your team see the greatest needs, and how has this shifted from earlier in the crisis, early mid-March, to where we are now?
Okay, well, I think many of you may know, obviously, that Fairfield County was hit harder by COVID-19 than many other regions, frankly, in the nation, not just in the state. And I think that as of May, we had more than 2,700 people in Connecticut and approximately 935 in Fairfield County who've lost their lives due to COVID-19. And it's created for us both unprecedented immediate needs as well as some long-term challenges that have not only been anticipated, but that we've been focused on as a community foundation for a while. Because we know that in Fairfield County, we actually have, of the top 100 metropolitan areas, one of the greatest income disparities. And so this has just intensified that. And what we're seeing is that the nonprofit sector, which delivers a number of services and works in partnership with our local governments, with our business sector, have been unbelievably overwhelmed by the demand. And where we're seeing it is the basic needs: housing, food, economic security, safety, what's happening with children and youth services, particularly because of the guidelines of closing the schools and having children learn from home.
Sure.
Well, those children who are learning from home may not necessarily all have the tools to learn from home. And frankly, even though there was a very generous donation of laptops to the action districts in the state of Connecticut, that doesn't necessarily address whether or not they have internet access.
Sure. Yeah.
How sophisticated or familiar their parents are to be able to support them, and frankly, how consistent or inconsistent the teachers are prepared to teach remotely, to design a curriculum that way. So we're seeing a lot of that. And then we're also seeing some tremendous challenges with respect to mental health and physical health. The physical health we hear about. You know, we hear about the sicknesses, we hear about the hospitalizations, we hear about sort of the shortage of PPE. We don't hear as much about the mental health, but there has been a significant, frankly, increase in domestic violence and other people who are just struggling with this. So it's sobering, and it is even for the people who are providing the services and the support, it's a mental and emotional challenge for them as well.
Yeah, it's incredible the ripple effect that you see with this virus, and we sometimes seem to focus a lot on the economy, right? But to your point, the mental health, it needs to be sort of in the forefront there. It's not only just going to be right now, but we're talking several months down the road in years that this has to be put here in the forefront. So Let's pivot to talk about the dollars. What is the importance of charitable dollars right now, and can you give us some examples of ways that private funds have
Right.
helped to sort of fill the gap there in the crisis?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, what's so interesting is that there have been 530 different response funds that were launched in response to COVID, and that's private foundations and local nonprofits um, and the community foundations, and over close to 400 of them actually are even housed at community foundations. And what we're seeing is for our own resiliency fund, we've received more than $2.2 million in funds just to the Fairfield County COVID Resiliency Fund. That said, we've also gotten $4.5 million in grant requests from the nonprofits. And, initially it was the first week, it was what was happening with the homeless shelters and how to decrowd them and providing some facilities for them. So I would say we launched our fund March 18th. We started getting money in the first week. Within the first 2 weeks, we were already deploying funds to the nonprofits. And the first ones going out were to those who were providing services for the homeless and food shelters and food banks. That started to persist in terms of it's consistent over time that food insecurity and the housing situation are the two biggest areas. We're also seeing tremendous increase in terms of child care providers providing services and support to the first responders, to the hospital, right, and essential employees. And that number, it just increases over time because what we're doing is we've already made contributions to over 140 nonprofit organizations throughout Fairfield County. And, that is across the board. We have funds that have gone to Norwalk Community College, for example, to help the students who are, struggling financially. We have funds that have gone to nonprofits in Danbury, sure, with respect to providing services for family centers and children. So it doesn't matter which community we're in all 23 towns and cities, we're seeing funds go to the nonprofit sector that are supplementing what the state government, and frankly, the state funding has just been cut so dramatically. Right. They haven't been providing the kind of resources that they even had in the past. And the federal funds and those protection programs, it just takes such a long time to get the dollars into the hands of the people who need it. They need it today. Sure. They need it yesterday. They don't need it they will still need it 3 weeks from now, but you get my point.
Yeah, I'm saying urgency. Yeah, absolutely. I have to give a shout out to the City of Danbury Health Department. They've done a tremendous job working with the homeless shelter. They've created an emergency shelter at the Super 8 off of Exit 4. Typically they have about 20 or 25 beds that they manage within the City of Danbury, but they've taken on additional homeless individuals. And I have to say that they've done a great job, as well as other community organizations in the area that's really band together to help with that need. And again, as you mentioned, it's just sort of, everywhere you turn, that there seems to be a need in one way or the other. So let's talk about the philanthropic landscape. Do you see that changing in the future given this crisis? And if so, how do you see these changes occurring?
Well, I've seen an incredible outpouring of generosity across the board. And we frankly usually see that in a crisis. Yeah. We saw it after Sandy Hook. We saw it after Hurricane Sandy. What we've also seen is some generous imaginative donors offering matching funds, matching or challenge grants. Sure. So the first $100,000 challenge grant we met. We have another one that's still in place. It's a $500,000 challenge grant, and that's being directed to contributions for under $10,000. We're really trying to get the message across that this philanthropic effort is not just for the very high net worth individuals, but it's across the board. Sure. And we're about 350,000 into meeting that challenge.
Wow.
So people have been stepping up. I also think that for me, the concern is, do people understand that this isn't just the immediate crisis? So what's going to be created by this is going to be exacerbated. When we get, frankly, the health part of this crisis under control, we're still going to have enormous unemployment, which is still leading to some of the same problems with respect to people being able to pay their rent, buy food, take care of the basics and the necessities. And obviously, people also want to stay safe. So I think for us, the challenge is going to be helping people understand, as much as we appreciate and need and are grateful for the generosity, it's not as though the need for it is going to go away. And I think that's a harder picture because it's longer term.
Sure, makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's, you mentioned something about the assistance. So for those who are looking to sort of get involved, what are some of the key takeaways to ensure that donor funds and their time are really most impactful?
Well, I think we've seen a number of things. One of the things we've done is loosen up our own guidelines with respect to, our investment policy spending guidelines,
Sure.
and allow donors a lot more flexibility. And the other thing is, donors have a tendency to like programs, very specific programs. But in this time, we also need to understand those nonprofits have to pay their staff, pay their rent, fund the infrastructure and all of those other things. So giving more flexibility for them to place the funding where they need it the most is a critical consideration.
Sure.
Because it's not about overhead at this point. It's about making sure you have the right talent with the right skills, being able to meet the rising demand. Sure. In terms of needs.
Yep, delivering services. We've got several dozen people on the call here joining us live. If you guys have any questions, feel free to shoot them towards our way on the chat box feature down on the bottom. So if you want to ask a question of Juanita, feel free to submit it, and we'll hopefully get it in the queue. So let's talk about the disaster preparedness. What has COVID-19 revealed in terms of disaster preparedness? And really more specifically, from what you're seeing, what are nonprofits and other sectors in Connecticut doing to build resiliency in the future?
Well, I'm very glad that you asked that question, PJ, because to be honest with you, a lot of nonprofits who hadn't been thinking about this before are really thinking
Sure.
about it now. And what we have done through our own Center for Nonprofit Excellence is offer a number of webinars about disaster preparedness and the type of things that one needs to think about in terms of your digital capability, in terms of your security, in terms of the safety and security of your own employees. And we've offered at least 4, and they are each attended by more than 100 people. And we're fortunate from the standpoint that we had already built in a business continuity plan well in advance of this disaster.
Sure.
So when it was time and we had to do it, we were able to really turn it around and work remotely. We've been working remotely since March 13th.
Okay. Yeah.
And all of our employees have access to laptops and are able to work remotely and keep things moving. And obviously we wouldn't have been able to we've already processed $1.8 million in grants that have gone out the door.
That's incredible.
And we wouldn't have been in a position to make it happen, to turn it around that quickly, to be able to respond so rapidly if we didn't have the infrastructure, the technology, and the training so that people knew what to do and how to continue to keep their jobs and services going during that process. So we're sharing that information widely with the nonprofits. In addition, if you go to our website, as a nonprofit, there's a separate page for resources that are available to them. And whether it's training resources for digital communications or thinking about particularly the human resource impact of this work and what you need to start doing to make sure that your employees are safe. Again, knock on wood, none of our employees have contracted the virus. Weeks before we even went remote, we were already doing all of the safety precautions with respect to deep cleaning, hand sanitizers, cleaning off all of the surfaces, making sure the conference rooms, as meetings happen, that we clean in between. So those are the lessons we're passing on, sort of the best practices to our whole nonprofit sector of not only how to keep their services going, but how to keep their own employees safe
Sure.
within their, environment. So those are just some of the things that are going on.
Excellent. Thank you. Appreciate that. We've been seeing a lot from the economic standpoint, conversations between regional states about partnering into a certain degree in terms of how they reopen the economy, just because they want to be able to make sure it's done in a safe way. What are some of the, well, I guess my question is, are there unique needs in Connecticut compared to, let's say, our neighboring states or states throughout the country? Do you see anything unique in Connecticut's needs?
Well, I think some of the things that are unique in Connecticut is the, for example, the public transportation system is clearly not as robust here. Right. So whether it's the train system, which doesn't run as frequently, or the bus system, so the public transportation system is not as robust here. And as a result, we didn't have to put into play a lot of the things, for example, that New York City had to do with respect to their public transportation system and those kinds of considerations. Sure. Isn't to say we didn't have to do it, but he didn't have to do it with the same level of intensity. But I also think that because we are so spread out, and we have both urban centers and suburban centers, we have to make sure that we're meeting the needs of our residents and our citizens in all different types of communities. So we're not just focused on the urban centers and the concentration there. We're also focused on what is happening in other areas. Our senior centers, as you know, the seniors have been most affected Sure. by this virus, and I think we have tried to really do as much protection as we can in that community. Because we have so many small communities, we have this real sense of neighborliness. And I know within our own communities, the volunteers immediately rose to the occasion to provide food shopping services and delivery and, the kinds of things that you think about when you know your neighbors, harder to think about when they're just some anonymous group of people that aren't that close to you. So I think the generosity of spirit is a real challenge. I also think my experience has been working in this community foundation is the degree to which we really value our nonprofits. We really look at them as partners in whether it's economy, education. I think that there is a respect for the nonprofits from the community members themselves. I'd like to see us be more sustained in terms of policy, in terms of funding the nonprofits so that they can continue to do their work. But those would be some of the things I would say about Connecticut, Okay.
Sure. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. So let's talk about identifying gaps. Naturally, during these, scenarios, gaps become, identified. What are you and your team doing at the foundation to both identify these gaps that exist and then coordinating with local governments specifically to help cover those gaps?
Well, I think we're doing some work and much more needs to be done. We're in the fortunate position, particularly the community foundations, of having built trusted relationships in our local communities. So even though we're funding directly to the nonprofits and most of us are not providing direct service, we have practices in place to be in touch with and connect with community leaders. We have nonprofits that are very focused specifically on youth advocacy and youth engagement. So we've built enough of a relationship with faith-based communities, with community centers, with grassroots organizations that we want to hear from them of what needs are being met and which ones are being missed. Really mobilizing that and getting our state agencies to tap into that trusted relationship and partnership, I think, is an important part of this. So I do think the biggest challenge we have as a state, because we are so fragmented into all of the different municipalities, is having any kind of a coordinated sight or view of what's going on and making those connections. And I think this new nonprofit entity, 4CT, was created to design that. How can they build connections? And they can't do it alone, because as a centralized entity, it can't happen. But building those communications with the local community foundations who have those connections with local community, it's really how do we set up a transparent and a quick communication system. I think we're still working on that. Sure. I think that's the promise and the intent. I can't say it's happening yet. Right. We're still working on that. How do you do that statewide when every single district has its own practices and policies and police force and school system and curriculum? It's not that easy to coordinate when you have that much local independence and local rule, but it's good.
They don't call us the land of steady habits for nothing, right? So each guest that I have here on Chamber Chats, I ask them to provide a piece of advice that they have either received throughout their career or something that you've learned in your own experience. So for those that are listening, and for those that will hear when we send this out through our email, is there a specific advice that you'd like to share with us that has had a tremendous impact on your experience in your career?
I think the most significant, particularly right now, advice and things I go back on is those of us who are practice professionals in the field, or well-educated or well-informed about one aspect of business, can sometimes become too confident, almost to the point of arrogance, that we know what the solutions are. And we often confuse wealth with wisdom. There are many people who don't have wealth or have not had access to, but they're very smart and intelligent about what their community needs are, what will make a difference, how to improve the situation. And I think listening to the people who are not only being impacted, but who are on the ground, listening to what people need as opposed to assuming what they need, or assuming we have the answers, versus that dialogue of how do we create the right responses. I think that's probably the most valuable lesson I've learned, because it isn't just about tops down. It really is engaging all voices in the community and respecting people and empowering people to work with you to create solutions. We have to work together to create solutions, not just one sector or one group dictating solutions for the other.
Well said. I appreciate that. So that's all we have time for, but I will give you the last word if there's anything else that you wanted to sort of add to our conversation today, Juanita.
What I want to say is I'm a person of hope and and I think that there's a spirit that says if we work on this together and support each other, we're going to get through this. We have encountered many challenges in the past. This one doesn't look like anything I have ever experienced before. But that said, I think willing minds and willing hearts working together find a way. And that's what I want to leave everyone with.
I could not agree more. I believe that we are stronger together, 100%. So, Juanita, thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking time out of your day, as well as your entire team working. I want to do a quick shout out to Mike Rosen. Mike's been very involved with the chamber up in our area, in the greater Danbury area. We're constantly communicating back and forth. But for your entire team, thank you again for all the assistance that you provide to profits and the community organizations in our area. Really appreciate that.
Well, thank you. And the team appreciates the appreciation because we are working faster, harder, longer. I mean, it's been very intense. So Excellent. Thank you very much for those words of appreciation.
Of course. Thank you, Juanita. And
thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. We have, we'll be having Anthony Rizzo Jr., who is the president and CEO of Rizzo Companies, on Wednesday at 1 p.m. He's also the chairman of the Greater Danbury Chamber of Commerce. So we look forward to chatting with Tony Rizzo on Wednesday. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Juanita, again, for your time. I hope everyone stays healthy and stays well. Take care.
Thanks so much, PJ.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.